Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we are taking another look at this issue we talked about Saturday, which involves the Discovery Channel deleting your content if you have purchased shows from them on your PlayStation console. I took a look at some of the end-user license agreements of a number of popular platforms, and unfortunately it looks like this is just the tip of the iceberg because most of these things say you own nothing, but there are some bright spots out there, so let's take a look. Now let's first dive into some questions that came in from the video I did over the weekend, and this is in regards to what your legal rights might be if you are a customer who purchased Discovery Channel media on your PlayStation and now are going to have that content deleted. Well, unfortunately, the terms of service that PlayStation has on its media store says that they have the right to discontinue your access at any time for any reason without prior notice or liability. They may even argue that they went above and beyond to let you know about that. And by the way, if you want to sue them, you can't do that either because you agreed by just using their service to binding arbitration that would have the dispute settled outside of court. You had the right to opt out of binding arbitration, but you had to send them a letter 30 days after you first booted up your PlayStation 3 years ago, so you don't have any access to that. But there is an opportunity for class action suits because they are exempt from this arbitration clause. And this is one of the issues I have with class action suits. They tend to benefit the lawyers suing, but also the company because it gets them out of jail for not a lot of money. But that's a whole nother video. Now, what's interesting about this Sony and Discovery issue is that it hasn't really been tested in court here in the United States insofar as consumers suing after content they purchased was taken out of their libraries. It's just not something that's happened all that much just yet. And an attorney I follow on X named Rob Freund, who's pretty knowledgeable in these areas, says that he expects a class action lawsuit at some point in the future over this. And Apple, he said, recently lost a motion to dismiss a case based on similar issues with iTunes. And the judge in that case said reasonable consumers might have been misled when they purchased digital content with the mistaken impression that the content could not later be removed from their libraries. So even though the terms of service state this very clearly, most people don't read that, and it looks like some judges are willing to give consumers a bit of an edge here because it's not fair to them to imply that you're owning something when in fact you don't. And why I think this is just the tip of the iceberg is because a lot of the things that we use to buy these media files are becoming obsolete. For example, PlayStation won't even sell you movies and TV shows any longer, but they're having to pay for infrastructure to keep serving that media to customers. And there's a lot of other devices out there that we purchase digital media on that might be running through similar issues. Nintendo is closing up their eShops, and you might not be able to download your games in the future. A lot of Sony consoles, of course, are obsolete as well. And the whole problem centers around something we talk about quite a bit on this channel. What do you think that problem is? Oh, I know, it's DRM. And the whole reason why Sony and Discovery are taking these files out of people's libraries is because Sony likely doesn't want to maintain the DRM anymore to make those files playable. They also probably don't want to host them any longer, so they're just going to pull it out of everybody's libraries, and I think that's going to happen a lot more as Sony discovers it costs a lot of money to continue serving this media to people, but they could easily solve the problem by giving customers access to a DRM-free file that they could download and watch on whatever they want. But that's not going to happen, is it? So let's take a look at what these terms of service look like on popular platforms. We're going to pick on Steam here, but the language that Steam uses is very similar to what I see across other digital platforms. Steam, of course, is a PC game digital platform where you can buy games and download them to your computer. And of course, they remind you in their terms of service that you are not buying anything, you are licensing it, and you must have a Steam account, and you have to check in on the internet to make sure that you have access to that game. And of course, these games are locked in by DRM. They also tell you that if you violate their terms and rules of use, they can yank your account and deny you access to all of your purchases without any refund. And of course, this has happened to people over the years. Sometimes they did bad things like cheating in games or whatever, but if you get caught doing something bad, all of the money you spent is gone along with the games as well. Now, if you decided you wanted to sue Valve over getting kicked off the Steam platform, you can't do it because you have agreed to binding arbitration only in their terms of service. And that, of course, is something you agreed to when you installed the software and set up your account. Now, Steam, in fairness, has been very good about making sure that when you purchase a game, it's available to you in your library, even if the publisher pulls the game from the store. I don't think there's been many major issues of people's games being deleted from their libraries even after the game left the platform. But, and there's always a but, remember that these game makers can impose their own end-user license agreement on top of what you agree to when you set up your Steam account. So for example, this new popular game Baldur's Gate, in their separate EULA, says that they may terminate this license at any time for any reason, very similar to the Sony language, and they could essentially pull this out of your library if they wanted to. So it's not totally clear that you would be safe from this happening to you on Steam for games that have a separate end-user license agreement. And most of the big games do have one of those EULAs that gives those publishers the right to pluck it away from you. Now, although we've been largely talking about games here, the reality is that most of the TV show and movie platforms have the same language in their contracts as well, and consumers are really not aware of this, as we saw with the Sony and Discovery thing. But not all is bad, and I always like to point to some examples of things that we as consumers can do to help nudge the industry in the right direction, and there are some bright spots. So the first one, of course, is GOG.com. Now, this started as Good Old Games, and they had a really cool business model, which is they went out to major game publishers and licensed all their old DOS games. And what they did is they built up a really cool library of games that you might have had at one point and lost or didn't have functioning floppies anymore. You could pay a few bucks and get that game delivered to you in a DRM-free package. And GOG has been acquired by CD Projekt Red, the makers of Cyberpunk, and now they're starting to offer more modern games on their platform as well. And they've based the business model largely around having the ability to hang on to that digital content and not have to have it validated every time you launch the game. And what they talk about here are owning the things that you buy. They have a game client like Steam, but you don't have to use it. You can download the games directly, and they're really focused on this. As a result, their library is not as extensive as Steam because not all publishers want to play by these rules. So here's a game that I own. I didn't realize I owned it. Elder Scrolls 4, they must have been giving it away. Somewhat modern, but this is a good example of what it's like to buy a game on GOG that's more recent. And what you see here on my product page is I could download GOG Galaxy, which is their client, or I can go in and just download these 3 files and install it on my computer from these, and there's no internet check, there's nothing that I need to do to get the game to run online. I can just boot it up and get playing. And of course I can install it on my Steam Deck or whatever else I want to use it with as well. Here's a game from the past, Wing Commander 2, one of my favorites. And this was a game that I loved. And I had one of those Roland sound things on my DOS PC. And unfortunately, the GOG version of the game did not include the Roland audio. But when I went into the game, I found that all the original files are there. And I was able to pull these out and install them on DOSBox and play with the Roland emulator on DOSBox, and I was able to get the game back to exactly where I remembered it being, which was really, really cool. And this is what I love about GOG, is that you can download these digital files and back them up, and even if GOG goes away, you basically own the digital bits of that title, and you can have them forever and install them on anything. Now, GOG's terms of service are also a lot better than their competitors, both from a readability standpoint for non-lawyers, but also in the terms themselves. So for example, if a game has a separate EULA and the terms of that EULA conflict with GOG's agreement with you, then GOG's agreement wins. That's a big one, and probably why a lot of publishers don't put their games up there, in addition to the DRM issues. They do have a right to terminate your agreement for material breaches, which are pretty serious ones. And if they suspend or cancel access to your services, they'll take reasonable steps to contact you and explain why they did this. And of course, you have the ability to take your stuff off the platform before you're kicked off additionally. So that's a good thing because, again, there's no DRM on the games. They also said if they stop providing access to GOG services, they're going to try to give you 60 days notice so that you can go in and download everything and protect it. Additionally, if you're in the USA, there's no arbitration clause. You can sue them in court. You do have to do it in a California court, but you can take them to court nonetheless and not be restricted by binding arbitration. And these are just a few of the things that are in there, but again, it's a much more consumer-friendly approach, not only in their user agreement, but also because they don't have DRM on the games. It is a little more complicated with some of the newer games that do have internet components to it and anti-cheat stuff going on, but by and large, they've been able to stick to the mission here of providing you a downloadable archive of the game that you own that can be installed separate from the platform with no ownership verification required. Now, this next example involves the music industry and, of course, Apple's iTunes. And this is an example of how you could do DRM-free rights. And, of course, the music industry did not do this on their own or willingly, but it actually worked out. Now, remember, the RIAA was just as evil as some of these TV and movie show studios in that they were suing even like teenagers for booting up Napster and downloading digital music at a time in which they offered no digital options to anybody. And of course, Steve Jobs and some of the other tech people out there started offering some options to the record industry where people could download music. But initially, all the music you could download was DRM protected. And one of the problems that resulted from this is that Apple had such a huge market share with the iPod that the record industry became concerned that everything was going to be funneled into Apple, because if you ever wanted to upgrade your iPhone or your iPod to something else, you often stayed with Apple because all that music you purchased was tied to their platform. So what happened pretty long ago now, actually, is that Apple changed their policy to sell you DRM-free songs. So if you buy songs through Apple, you will get a DRM-free song that you can play on anything. It's 256K AAC. You can't buy lossless that way, but there are options for lossless out there that I'll show you in a minute, and it's worked out very well. And of course, most of the industry now is DRM free when you purchase music. And it's great that that has happened because all of these problems that we're talking about don't really happen with music anymore. Now, what if you purchased music in the past from Apple? Well, right now, those are encrypted still, but there's a workaround, and this is a really good option. Apple has something called iTunes Match. It's been around forever, and it began as kind of an amnesty program where you paid Apple $25 a year, they went through your iTunes library, and if they had a match from your library in theirs, you got a properly licensed purchase added to your account, and it basically got you out of jail. And the record industry was very happy with this, and it was something that a lot of people don't think about anymore, but it's still available. I've been subscribed to it since it came out. And in addition to amnesty for your adventures on the high seas, it also converts even your low-quality MP3 files to those 256K AAC files. They are DRM free. Additionally, Apple provides cloud storage for your entire library, including 100,000 unmatched songs that are not in their library that you can still play through Apple's music app on whatever it runs on. They have free library streaming to 5 devices. It costs $25 annually. But when you have a matched file, like I have here, you can just download it and copy it onto something else. So for example, I had Mariah Carey's hot popular song there, All I Want for Christmas Is You. I'm sure you all love that song. And I was able to download that from my Match library, and it gave me an AAC file that I was able to boot up and play on VLC. Now again, this is a subscription program, but you don't have to stay subscribed. So what you could do, especially if you've got a bunch of stuff you bought from iTunes 10 years ago, you can go in there, have it match everything for you, download all the DRM free stuff, and then you can cancel the subscription and move on. So it's definitely worth looking at. I find a lot of value from this in the hosting of my overall library because, again, it will host files that are not in their library that you can stream to any device. So you don't have to walk around with terabytes of music on your phone. You can stream it from them in whatever format you uploaded it in. And then for the music where there are matches, you get the higher quality option. And again, the option to download DRM free that you can move elsewhere. But iTunes Match is not lossless. And if you want the best quality audio, there are DRM free options for that. Again, all legal and blessed by the record industry. HDtracks is one of the many vendors of lossless audio. Some of this stuff is even better than CD quality. You have a choice of format that you can download that audio in, and you can play it back on anything. It's crazy that music got so good when it comes to DRM, and there's no reason why the movie and TV people can't do the same thing. It just doesn't make sense to me, but perhaps they have to see an impact to their business like the record industry did to get them to see the light that DRM is actually hindering things versus helping. And if we take a look at the health of the record industry, they're actually in pretty good shape overall. They've seen growth year over year. And of course, just like we talked about in my last video, most of their revenue is now coming from streaming. 84% of what the record industry earns comes from mostly paid subscriptions, and you can see the growth of that. Ad-supported is certainly there and growing, but most consumers are preferring to just pay a monthly subscription fee to listen to their music. Now, I want to go back to the slide here for a second, though. Look at the share of the pie for digital downloads. It is only 3% of the overall. Physical is only 11%, and a lot of that now is actually vinyl records, not CDs. In fact, vinyl is outselling CDs at this point. Now, as great as things are for music, unfortunately, as we've been talking about, things are pretty bad for TV shows and movies, and they're going to get worse with now studios taking content away from people who purchased it. But there is a way that I think we might be able to do a little bit of advocacy here with Apple. Now remember, we've been doing advocacy on the DRM for over-the-air TV broadcast. We're not at the end of that journey yet, but it is definitely on the radar screen, I can tell you that. So all the effort that you've done there has made a difference. I think we have an opportunity here with Apple, and the reason is that in addition to making phones and the iTunes library and all that other stuff, Apple owns a movie studio that makes TV shows and films. Some of those movies go into the movie theater. The Apple TV shows end up on Apple TV Plus, of course, and they also sell Blu-ray discs of those productions on major retail sites. Now, they don't yet offer digital purchases of their TV shows and movies. They want you to subscribe to the streaming service. But if anyone could make DRM-free TV shows and movies happen, it's Apple, because they own the whole stack here, the store and the content, and they could very easily make available this content without DRM. So I think what we should do is send emails to Tim Cook, tcook@apple.com. That's his email address. He may not respond to you, he probably won't, but somebody there actually looks at this stuff as it comes in, because they do care about what customers think. And if we use a similar subject line, I think that might give them some ability to see there's a bunch of people with similar opinions on this. I'm going to write up an email and put it in the video description so that you can have something to start with if you'd like that. And I think we can make a difference here by getting Apple thinking about doing for TV shows and movies what they did for music, because it did change the industry for the better. They didn't have to do it because ultimately they could have kept everybody locked into their iPods, but they did the right thing for consumers. And I think it's time for Apple to take a leadership role on this, because these EULAs on all of this content we own, or we thought we owned, are really going to create problems in the very near future. And I think it's going to lead to the destruction of the industry, because the record industry almost destroyed themselves pursuing this crazy DRM stuff. So we can put it to rest here. I think we can make a difference. Send an email to Tim Cook and let me know what you think down in the comments below. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Brian Parker, Budley, Hot Sauce and Video Games, Steve Green, and Amda Brown. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.